Well, we are back for another. I won't use the word action pack. It's not a movie. It is real life, and we have a lot to unpack as usual on our podcast. Carrie, thank you so much for again saying yes, for being here to share your story, and welcome to Fertility Ain't Fair.
Thank you, Brittany, for having me. It's an honor. This is so cool.
Well, look, I like being cool sometimes. Um, a lot of our topics aren't cool, right? Like they're
Right.
not cool. They're
Well,
not
I don't know. I
exciting.
think it's pretty cool to be talking about the things that people don't talk about. That is very cool to me. I think that is a very cool thing.
Fair. No, fair. It's all about perspective. So
Yes,
you're right. Very
yes.
fair. Yes, little known things. I learned something literally on every single episode. So we're here to unpack a lot again today. So let's just jump on in. So first things first. Actually, I usually ask the same question to my guests in terms of how do you define yourself as of today? But for you, I'm going to save that for later.
Okay.
Because I want to kind of dive into a couple other things first, and then kind of look at like how you have redefined life as of now.
Yes.
Once we get to the now point. Okay, great. So we're going to be a little unorthodox on this episode. So let's talk about your path to motherhood.
Okay.
There was a lot to that. I
Yes.
believe it was an eight-year journey. I
8
believe.
years. Yep.
So I know it's a lot to, talk about over an 8-year period, but kind of give us a little bit of backstory into what you were doing and kind of what that journey looked like for you.
Sure. So when my husband and I got married, we'd kind of been trying before, but we officially were telling people that we were trying. And we tried naturally for 5 years. And it was really fun the first few years, and then it quickly became not fun. I became depressed and anxious and watched everyone around me easily get pregnant. No one did IVF or anything like that around me, so it wasn't even really in my realm. And then we finally got up the courage to even tell a doctor that we were trying, because I was embarrassed by it. I was so ashamed that I couldn't do this thing that I thought biologically I was supposed to do. And we became great candidates for IVF. My husband has a low sperm count, and at the time nothing seemed off with me. So we did IVF. And then the first round I got pregnant, and then I had a miscarriage about 8 or 9 weeks. It was my first time being pregnant. It was a lot to okay, this is happening. It was happening very fast, because I feel once you start that IVF start things, everything's timed and everything has to be on this schedule. And then I had a miscarriage, and then my next cycle, we went right into the next IVF transfer, and I got pregnant, and I carried my daughter for 8 months. And then I developed a rare liver disease called cholestasis of pregnancy. And it's very itchy. I always like to say that if you're very itchy when you're pregnant, you should see a doctor. And I didn't really think anything of it. And when I finally brought it up to my doctors, it was probably a bit too late. And within getting diagnosed, within a week, my daughter died. And I delivered her stillborn in May of 2019. Her name is Clementine, and she is still a huge part of mine and my husband's life. And that, of course, rocked my world, changed literally every single core to my being. Everything changed after that. And we still had 2 frozen embryos, and I was advised not to get pregnant again because this disease most likely comes back. If you get it once, you'll most likely have it again. And also, I want to say that if you do get cholestasis of pregnancy, there is medication for it. People do have healthy babies from this. I just wasn't really aware of it. And I was told not to get pregnant. We still had 2 frozen embryos, and we kind of put the word out that we were looking for a surrogate, and we had more than one amazing women step up. And we ended up going with one of my best friends from childhood. And it brought us back together in the most beautiful way. We hadn't spoken in a really long time. And she got pregnant twice, but ended up having 2 miscarriages. And that was the 8-year mark. And I was kind of tired of being so sad, and I needed something to change. And I wanted something that I could control and change, because I felt so out of control during most of this. And so we looked into adoption a little bit, but where we live, the goal is to reunify children with their parents. And that felt really risky to not have, like, I think you have like a year, but that felt too risky for me. And so we decided against it, and now are child free.
That was a lot that you went through.
Yes, it is.
I mean,
yes, it is a
all
lot.
the hurdles, like jumping through all the hoops.
Yes.
All the things. So, okay, a couple things. So 5 years trying naturally. So during that time, was anyone outside of your husband aware that you all were struggling to conceive?
We were telling people that we were trying, like friends and family, but everybody was just so positive, and I am usually like very positive and upbeat, and so it didn't, from the outside, it didn't look like anything was wrong at all. It was just like, we got the classic, have you tried? And it was, in the beginning, I was literally taking notes, being like, okay, we'll try that. And then, like 3 years in, you're like, I've tried everything and anything you can think of. My husband used to say, when you're telling somebody this, they're often thinking about it for maybe 3 minutes. And we've been thinking about it for like 8 years. Like, we tried it. So we were open with people around us, but again, it didn't look like it felt. Like, I came home and cried. I was a teacher at the time. I would cry a lot before going to work. And I kept my negative emotion. Well, I don't want to say negative. I kept the more difficult emotions for me to process very quiet, because I didn't want to be the sad person. And I was genuinely sad.
Yeah, no, it resonates. Like, I feel like I tell my close friends, like, I hate being the one who brings like the mood down.
Yes.
Or like the one, if we're like, oh, what's going on? And, hey, we want to know, hey, where are you at right now? And it's like, I hate having to bring the heavy all the time.
Yes.
But I'm like, but that's just kind of what's happening. Like, I don't, I don't want to be that girl either.
Yes. And I think that, like, looking back on it now, if I would have been more open about it, I don't think I would have had such the mental capacities really struggle as much as I did. But you don't know until, like, when you're in it, you're like, I'm just going to keep going. I'm going to keep doing this because I'm going to get to my end goal. And I tried really hard to, like, do the same things that had been working for me, but they weren't working.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Okay, so moving into IVF world, I'm so glad to hear her name. I love her name, Clementine.
Me too.
It's precious, and unique and beautiful. And so I'm glad that you're still able to honor her, as you mentioned, still a part of your life. And so one thing that other lost moms about is like, hey, I still want to like talk about my child, like in my own time, in my own way, but like, it's okay to say their name. It's okay to talk about them. What are the other ways that you all have like chosen to honor Clementine, her purpose, and just being, or aside for the time that she was here?
So when I was in the hospital bed before I delivered her, the hospital offered a chaplain, which I didn't know what it was at the time. And my husband is an atheist, and I remember being like, nope, he's not going to want that person in here. And I got very, almost scarily, like, trying to control anything I could at that point for like a good few years, because I was lost. And I remember being in the bed, and I immediately was like, okay, if we're not going to get a chaplain, we need help. And I was emailing grief counselors, like, we're going to be out in a few days. Can we see you as soon as possible? And one woman got back to me, and within 3 days, we went to her office, and she was just like this divine peace that told us, you're going to be okay, which I needed somebody official with framed certificates on the wall to tell me that, because I wasn't really sure if I was going to be okay. But I remember her saying, you need to say her name, and you need to say it as much as possible. And so every night, my husband and I, instead of saying like, good night, I love you, we just say good night, Clementine. It's like almost we've replaced the word love with Clementine in our vocabulary. And it kind of like meshes into this like, oh, this is so Clementine. And it's like something that if you're in our inner circle, you'll know it. But often a lot of people like don't pick up on it. So we, again, say her name all of the time. We have we were gifted a clementine tree, and we take like meticulous care of it. This year was the first year clementines actually came when we got to eat the fruit. And it's like, we just try to bring in anything that is clementine related has been a very big thing. And I didn't know this, but so we had to fill out a death certificate, and you don't have to name your baby. We chose to, and which was very interesting because like we still thought we were going to have kids, and so we were like, do we use this name? Because we couldn't figure out a name, but once I saw her, I was like, no, this is Clementine. And so having a name, even if it's like a nickname, to be able to say, to call back to write. Sometimes like if I'm getting coffee at the coffee shop, I'll use Clementine's name just to like hear somebody say it. And it like fills me with like so much, like this is still a part of me. So I think the name itself, or having some sort of like I have a friend who has like an elephant as their like image, and so they have elephants all over. Just having like some sort of imagery, name, being able to bring it back into your life as much as possible, because it like acknowledges that it's real.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love I love everything about it. I mean, I hate that, that's what is left of her, obviously. But like you said, to be able to assign something to this was my baby. This is,
Yes.
this was my person. And I think that's really, really important. So I'm glad that you all have been able to find those ways to do that. Going back to surrogacy, and I wanted to know more about it because I've had a couple close friends who have told me, like, look, I will carry a baby for you. Like, hurry up, girl. But but I'm totally open. And, if it ever got down to this, like, I'm your girl. And I have felt grateful that I have a couple like really good people who said, I will do that for you. Right. On the flip side, I've never felt like I could accept it because I think I was scared that if something goes wrong, how is that dynamic going to change, right? Or how am I going to feel? How are you going to feel, right? And then also, these people already have children, and so I'm like, if anything were to happen to you, like I couldn't imagine taking you from your kids, whether it was short term, permanently. I just go into spiraling of all the awful that could happen. And so I'm wondering, when it came to you and your best friend or your good friend from childhood, because one of my friends from childhood as well. Again, I know it can be a beautiful thing, and I know it can, I said, bring you all together and just this beautiful space. And if it all were to work out, like, wow, what a story. But it didn't work out in the favor of bringing another child for you, Earthside. So how have you all gotten through that, or how have you all worked through the fact that, there were two losses here that we were hoping for, and it didn't work out in our favor?
I think you bring up a really important part of like, I know you say you were spiraling, but I think it's very real of like, I feel like I was bringing someone into like my trauma, and I didn't really necessarily want to do that. But then, because I also want to like preface everything. I go to therapy, and I've been going to therapy for years, and have a therapist that focuses on people dealing with infertility. So that has been so helpful. And I remember talking to my therapist, because I thought the same thing of like, what if something happens? And she was like, this is a consenting adult. Like, she's an adult. She's making this choice. And I'm like, okay, but she wouldn't be making it if it weren't for me. And it was like, but she wants to give you this. And you don't have to take it. But if this is the step you want to take, you're going to have to take it with somebody. And thankfully, also with us, like our clinic screened a few people, because we had, like I said, multiple people tried. And some people, like a dear friend was too old in their mind. Another woman, like, it just didn't work out. And so, and they had the tough conversations, which was convenient, because I don't want to be like, I can't pick you because of your age. Like, that feels terrible. Also, she, it's anyways. So, and then going through that with somebody, it was nice to have, at least for me, and I think that there's pros and cons to this. So Becca was our surrogate's name, and we brought her in, and she and I had been through so much already, like as kids, because I met her when I was 5, and we were together all through school. So like we'd had tough conversations before, and that was super helpful. I could also see on the flip side of like, if you've never had a relationship with this person and it's only tough conversations, that's also like kind of a safe space because you're like establishing the groundwork. And she was an angel. She still is. And honestly, we've because we didn't talk for like a decade or two. Like we connected through social media, and then when I announced on social media we were looking, she reached out, and we've become extremely close since then. So it's like it kind of brought us back together, and we both actively reach out. And I think that that's something that we both put work into that I know that wasn't there before, and honestly could not have gone that way after, and it would have been okay. But having her bring so much joy into my life, I was like, oh, I want to keep this close. And I remember how good this feels. And that's been a nice way for us to like progress our friendship.
Okay. That's a good way, again, to look at it from the perspective of what the therapist said. Like, again, they're agreeing to this, we're going to go through all the risks. We're going to have the doctors go through all the risks, all the testing and all of that. So I thank you for sharing that. Because again, I'm sure is someone out there thinking about it or considering it, or again, who has an amazing friend who said, hey, I'll do it. And, it's like.
Right. And I think like, at least for me, knowing that the clinic, we didn't use an agency, which I want to establish too. We did not use an agency. We just used our clinic, but our clinic still did all of the like, these are the cutoffs, you're not making it, or this isn't working out, we can't move forward. So it was nice. That was nice not coming from me. And I didn't know if that was going to happen without an agency, but it did with our clinic.
That makes sense. Okay. Let's pivot now into like support, because there was something in your bio that I saw between your husband and it was just this really sweet little piece that said like, we found more love, basically somehow after all of this. And I resonated with that because my husband and I talk often about how, we have gotten closer, and I don't take it for granted because I know that not every relationship survives infertility. Not every marriage survives infertility. So, I find, that to be a blessing, quite honestly. So the statement on we have found more love through this, can you just dive a little bit into kind of what you mean by that and how that has shown up in your life?
The first thing that comes through, my husband is the greatest human I ever met in my life. So there's that. But I think specifically like grief cracked me open in a way that I was unaware of. And prior to my husband and I dating, his best friend had died. And he was so good at his grief to where I'd never seen anybody do that before. And while I never met his friend, he talked about his friend a lot. His friend came up in conversation like with his family still. There's pictures of his friend all over our home. And so I was like, oh, like you're good at grief. Okay. And then when Clementine died, we grieved so differently to where I was like, you're doing this wrong. I feel like you're doing this wrong. I remember he had to be in the house. And I was like, can you come inside, please? Like, stop. Why are you outside trying to paint the house? And he was like, I can't just sit on the couch and cry. And I was like, no, you must. This is what we're doing. Everyone's here. We're all sitting on the couch. Yeah. We're all doing this and you're not participating. And I remember he had to like pull me aside and say, Carrie, like this like up and down painting motion is somehow extremely healing to me at this moment. And he's a doer. And so he was like, I need to do something. I need to fix something. And our house needed to be painted. So that's what he did. And being able, and we've always been very open and honest with each other, but like having that example of like, oh, okay, we don't have to do this in the same way, but it doesn't mean that you loved her any less, that you love me any less. And it kind of just showed me just how great it can be to honor somebody else's experience through grief, even if it's not the same way as I do. And I feel like that brought us closer. And it comes up a lot in other ways of like, remember, this is not how I always do the things you do. And it's like, oh, right. We went through a really traumatic experience together and we're still strong. It doesn't mean we have to do everything aligned. And I think being open and honest was really the biggest part of it, but also like allowing the other person to have space to grieve.
That is like unlocking a whole new level in a game. Like life level unlocked. Like that is like next level marriage, maturity, relationship 101. Like but it's really, really important, like you said, like and grief shows up differently with everybody. And is it communication styles are different or grieving is different. And if you don't acknowledge that, and if he wasn't able to communicate that to you, that could have been like an internal breakdown, right?
Oh
Like
my gosh.
you would have
Why are you
felt
taking the
like,
house right now?
why,
Like,
why are you doing this? You didn't care. I cared. I went through all my body, like,
mhm.
yeah. And that could have been just like I said, a complete breakdown versus
Yes.
being like, you know what, you're right. We can do this different and have the same feeling behind it. That's super important, like super, super important. Um, how do you define grief? Because everyone's version is different. And I tell the story a lot, like I think growing up, like a lot of us, unless you went through something very traumatic growing up, but like, grief was always assigned to the death of a person, right? It
Mhm.
was, that's what grief was, that's what it's reserved for. And that's the way I looked at it. And then someone kind of flipped me on my head one day and was like, the grief is loss of anything, a loss of an expectation. It's the loss of an idea, the loss of a dream, of course, other ways to lose, but it literally is the loss of anything. And that for me was like, oh, again, life level unlocked. I'm like, okay, so I can assign this is why I'm actually grieving a
Yes.
negative pregnancy test, or this is why I'm actually grieving the loss of an embryo, or the loss of not being able to do a cycle, or to just not be able to naturally conceive ever
Mhm. Mhm.
at this point. So, how do you define grief, and has that definition changed over the course of this time?
Grief has definitely changed. I did not lose anyone extremely close to me when I was young. So same kind of thing of like, I didn't really know grief until Clementine. But I want to bring up, there's this woman that I used to take courses from. Her name is Cole and Perry, and she came up with the term called shadow loss. And it is when it's not a grief of a body, but a grief of something, a death of a body, a death of something, a divorce, your house burned down, you're moving. And having that name
Mm.
really resonated with me with infertility, because it quickly was, once we like found out that we were probably gonna have to do IVF, it was like, oh wow, I have to let go of this life that I assumed I
Yep.
was going to have.
Yep.
And that was probably the hardest part for me, and one of the biggest things in therapy that I had to like reframe and come back to over and over and think like, you can still have a good life. But I had no idea what that looked like, and I had to grieve that. And then we did lose Clementine and other babies, but there is that like letting go of, I mean, I have journals and journals of me as a kid dreaming of all these things
Same.
that aren't happening. And it's scary. Honestly, it was very
Yeah.
scary, because it's like all of a sudden that's just wiped. And now I don't know what to go through the pages
Yeah. That's a
with.
good way to put it. I'm the same way. Like it was like, and I agree with you. I think the hardest thing has been like constantly moving the vision, like constantly moving the finish line, because you think it's going to be here and then it's here and then it's okay. Well, that didn't happen. So, it's like, okay, well, IUI didn't happen. Now we're going to IVF, and then IVF didn't happen. And now, so it's like moving the expectation or the vision. And I agree that has probably been the hardest thing outside of loss, has just been okay, removing
Especially
the
because like I can get on board. Like, I can get on board with the IUI. We'll do it and it'll work, and I will 110%. And
yeah,
but when that doesn't work, you have to shift again. It's like, gosh, this is
yeah,
kind of exhausting. Like trying
oh, yeah,
to be so on board and so like researching and manifesting and just trying to like live that life. You're like, you keep
yeah.
my life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Completely agree. So, I guess the next question is going to be, so how have you redefined that life? At
I
this point, you've acknowledged, okay, I'm going to move forward. Like I said, child free, not by choice. This is where we're at. How is life redefined now?
I feel like, even like thinking about what we were just talking about of like having like this blank slate, I now look at this blank slate as like really exciting. And it's like, okay, I can try these new things, and if they don't work, that I can clearly wipe it clean because I've survived something so terrible that like we can keep redoing this. And this translated into my work. So I was a teacher for 10 years and I loved it until I didn't. And after Clementine died, I went back the next school year, and within a few months, and I was like, this is not what I want to do. And so I just quit. And I feel like that's something in my life that is happening a lot now of like, if I don't want to do it, I'm not doing it. And I always wanted to be a writer. And now people are paying me to write about grief, which feels not real, but it's such a dream that like little me had, not necessarily about grief, but just like as a writer. And being able to like rewrite your life to how you want it. It's not easy. It's super scary, but it also like can be done. And that is something that like fuels my fire. I remember when we first got diagnosed with cholestasis of pregnancy, and I remember the doctor saying, you have a less than 1% chance of losing your baby, which we looked it up. That's real. And for a long time, I kept thinking, if that small percentage of thing can happen to me, what other bad things can happen to me? And then I started to like flip it of like, if that small percent of things can happen to me, what large percent of things good can happen for me? Because that was 1%. And I wasn't thinking about the rest of the 99% of the time or of the things of the way that I can live my life. And once I started to kind of like spin that perspective, it was like, oh, I have so much space for all of this goodness in me. I don't have to focus on that tiny, tiny statistic. And so being able to kind of like flip my script, and I'm not gonna lie, like I have had to stand in front of the mirror and tell myself this over and over because I didn't believe it. I still sometimes don't believe it. But I have to like say, and it's almost like if you say it enough, you'll believe it. And so that's kind of how I've redefined this. And that happens a lot when I change new clients or if we try a new way of like traveling or something, being able to like reframe it of like, okay, what is the goodness in this and what can I pull out of it? Because there's always going to be badness. I just don't want to focus on that like I used to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think just something that we all can do in whatever aspect of life. And I agree with you. I think I used to be, I would say I'm a realist, but I was also a pessimist. So I would mask it as I'm just being real. It's like, well, okay,
Right.
I mean, this thing is negatively real, but yeah. And I think they said through, and I think the early years, because this is 6 years for us, we've been at this and we're still at it. In the early years, we're filled with anger and jealousy and of course depression and sadness and hurt, and I focus just so heavily on the not. And so, yeah, I mean, I still have my days, don't get me wrong, it's not a perfect science, but I do find myself now kind of more quickly and naturally kind of just flipping, okay, let's look at it this way, let's look at it this way. It's like, well, this didn't work out, but but this did. And okay, we figured out this piece, but we're still missing this piece. So it's always a crazy puzzle. But as you mentioned, it's like learning how to reframe better and more naturally, so that becomes just the way your brain is kind of rewired to
Yeah.
to,
And it's
to
not
look at.
easy. Like
No,
I
oh
can't
no.
imagine Carrie from like 6 years ago being like, it's gonna be fine. Like that is not the attitude I had at all.
Same. Yeah. Yeah. And we haven't reached that other place yet, right? So we don't know what our deciding factor is going to be. We're not there yet. We still have 2 embryos frozen, and so the goal is to put those babies somewhere. So we'll see, but it's good to see and hear and feel someone who has crossed into the next phase, that has chosen intentionally, I've been through enough. And just to see you here in just a space, I know it's not always going to be good, as you said, but to see you here in a space of joy, and I have found new purpose, I have redefined life, and I'm loving the life that I was given, regardless of the trauma that I was also given along with it. And it's just so refreshing to see that, because I think we have to acknowledge again the whole other space of women and couples and families who do not end up with a child to raise.
When I was dealing with that, I didn't really know anybody that didn't.
Right.
I assumed IVF meant baby. Like that's just what
Right.
it meant. And then when I had to start like digging for people, and they were there, but a lot of them didn't want to talk about it. And I was like, but I want to talk about it.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful that you did. Because again, there's so many more people out there. And it's like you have to see what it, and not saying that someone has to, you know, mirror what you're doing, but to see what it looks like and to know that it's possible and to know that I can still be fulfilled and valued and have a great life and be happy and travel and live out whatever I want to do. And I can do all that. I'm still a family and I'm still worthy,
Absolutely.
even if I don't have a child to raise. So I'm just grateful for you for saying, I want to share that, because we need to share all sides of the story, because there's a million ways these
yes,
things
there's so many different pathways that we never knew could happen. And I think when I think about like younger me being so like angry and upset, I don't think I would be here without that. Like, you know, I needed to be angry and jealous and have those emotions and like work through it, because you can't just get to the greatness. Like you can't hike the mountain without hiking the mountain.
Very true. Yeah, no, very, very true. We can't, we're not there yet. So now I'll ask you, what are the words or phrases that describe or define who Carrie is as of today?
I am happily child-free, and I go back and forth between using the words childless and child-free. I want to acknowledge that. It kind of depends on where I'm at.
Okay.
Most of the time I like to think of child-free just because it has a more positive spin on it. And so like that's a lot of times, but sometimes I feel childless. And I am a writer, and I love like in general. I am so fulfilled and lit up, especially by women who are seeing themselves in their own truth. And that like makes me the happiest that I've ever felt in my life. And I didn't know that was there until I started connecting with people in the infertility community, and now in the infertility as well as child-free community, and like seeing women own themselves in the most beautiful way. And I love writing about it and sharing their stories. And it's like one of the main things that I do.
I love it. I love it. So tell us, if someone wants to connect with you, they want to find you, they want to hire you to write, where can they find you?
I'm on Instagram at Blooming with Care most of the time. I have a website, bloomingwithcare.com. And I recently started TikTok, Blooming with Care.
Yes, like we're doing our best with TikTok. We're all doing our best. You're quite a pro already. I'm like, I'm just doing my best.
I mean,
now I gotta follow you on TikTok, so I'll do that when we get off.
We're new. It's fun though. I mean, like I'm generally enjoying it. Like it's kind of fun.
It's fun. Like I don't know how to do all the fancy things, but I'm like, one video at a time. We're gonna get ourselves, you know,
all somewhere.
Yeah. So I thank you for this conversation. I thank you for your honesty, your transparency, and the work that you're doing to share all sides of the story. And I'm just grateful for you, grateful for your work. And I'm sure there'll probably be a book someday. I'm just waiting.
I did write a book here. Yes. So I'm editing it now. So this is the project. My book now. Yes. Yay! I love that.
I was like, it has to be a book coming. I'm not sure it's going to be your journey or multiple stories that I don't know. Here or there, we'll be surprised when it comes out, but that's super exciting, because why would you not write a book and maybe more, you know, in the future? So
that's the plan.
Look, from our lips to God's ears. So kudos to you. Thank you for joining Fertility Ain't Fair, and we look forward to continuing to keep up with you and your journey.
Thank you. And thank you for having me and sharing other people's stories. Being able for women or anyone to have a space to hear how other people are dealing with this changed my life, and it is an essential part of the community. So you're doing great work.